Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining me today for my monthly video chat. I know probably most of you know, but my name is Angela Bell and I'm an acupuncturist. I specialize in fertility and pregnancy in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And every month I sit down with a Boston birth professional and chat about the services he or she offers. And today I am very lucky to be sitting with Emma O'Brien. She is a doula and an herbalist. So hello Emma, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey everybody, thank you for having me, Angie.
So I introduced you as a doula and an herbalist, and I know that you often consider yourself a full spectrum doula. Can you just tell us a little bit more about what does it mean to be a full spectrum doula? Because there's so much out there, so much amazing resource for people in the Boston area. Tell us a little bit about what that means.
Sure. Well, full spectrum doula is a term that is used a lot lately, and it sort of means different things to different people. But generally speaking, it's a doula. So doulas are advocates, non-medical support people, emotional, physical support, resource connections for not just birth. So for some folks, that could be somebody who's giving a baby for adoption, or for folks who are adopting a baby, it could be pregnancy loss, including miscarriage and abortion. Mm-hmm. And some other folks are also like death doulas, and they call full spectrum between birth and death. They kind of hold space for both of those experiences. So in the Boston area, I'm involved with the Boston Doula Project, and so this organization focuses specifically on abortion support, on training abortion doulas. So a lot of us are also birth doulas, and so we have sort of this full spectrum, knowing that 1/3 of women will have an abortion before age 45 in America. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes people have both experiences in their lifetime. It's not just one or the other. It's not one side or another, black and white. Many people experience a miscarriage and an abortion and a birth in the same, or a loss in the same lifetime. So that's sort of what I mean when I'm coming from full spectrum.
I love it. It's so amazing. I think that so many people don't even realize that that is an option to have that kind of support. So I love that you talked about it, and I love that you offer it. And tell me again the organization that it is that you work with.
Yeah, it's the Boston Doula Project. So you can find us on Facebook or bostondoulaproject.org. And people contact us directly if they're looking for doula support. We do have a limited amount of low-cost birth doulas available, and but we do focus on miscarriage and abortion support around Boston.
So amazing.
Yeah.
But you also do a little bit of postpartum work. Is that true?
I do. Yeah, I'm trained as a birth doula and a postpartum doula and an abortion doula. But for postpartum, I'm taking fewer clients these days because I'm on call for more births. Yeah. And as anyone who's on call for more births can understand, sometimes you have to cancel on people. And so I do some postpartum care here and there for folks who I've already been working with in a birth doula capacity, but it's not my main gig these days.
Yeah, I can understand. I have no idea how doulas and midwives do the schedules that they do.
It's a delicate balance.
It's a delicate balance, yes, I can imagine. So tell us a little bit about why you became a doula and how you got started.
Sure. Well, I moved to Boston thinking I would get a degree in social work. Mm-hmm. So I always kind of thought that was my purpose kind of in life. I'm like, I'm going to help people in some capacity, Even in high school, I used to volunteer at a rape crisis center in Brockton. It's called a New Day Crisis Center. Mm-hmm. So even as an older teenager, I was part of this organization that did on-call hospital advocacy. So if somebody did show up at one of the hospitals in the area to get a rape kit done, they would call and say, do you want us to send an advocate? And so it was just someone who basically doulaed them through that experience. They said, you can, consent to or not any of these procedures, calm down an anxious family member in the waiting room, let them know their legal rights, and all kinds of know what to expect, hold their hand, all that kind of stuff. So knowing that I could sort of handle doing that, after I came to Boston, I realized, a social worker salary in terms of the student loan debt situation, I was thinking, maybe I'll consider other options, and there's other ways for me to help people that aren't, so expensive to me. And I knew somebody who was a doula, and my roommate at the time was working at Planned Parenthood, and one of her coworkers was going to a birth doula training, and it kind of just dawned on me. I was leaving school, and I thought, I'm going to do that. That's what I'm going to do.
That's so awesome.
So that was in 2010, and I attended my first birth that year. And in the meantime, I was doing a lot of childcare and nannying and kind of helping people with little ones around the city, welcome second little ones, and doing in-home care. So then it was like a natural progression eventually to do more full-time birth work.
Yeah. And that kind of support that you were doing in high school, it's like it lends so perfectly into the birth world.
Definitely. There's a lot of overlaps, a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about this next issue specifically because I haven't talked about it before, and I think it's a big issue in Boston that just kind of needs to be talked about, and that is supporting the LGBTQ community in the birth world. I see a lot of lesbian couples in my practice who are trying to get pregnant, and so I talk a lot about the needs in the community around the process of trying to conceive. But the piece that I haven't talked about much is the needs in the queer community for birth support.
Sure.
So I love that that's a part of your practice. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that means, how that looks? Why is that important?
Sure. Well, I'm a queer person, and as a sort of out birth doula, I find that about a third of my birth doula clients are also somewhere LGBTQ or another.
Yep.
And I'm very happy to be supporting people in my community. I think that, just fits really well for me. Yeah. And it's interesting because I often work with folks who have either undergone a lot of trouble conceiving or had to pay out of pocket for a lot of procedures. And so I hear these stories, but I'm not often supporting them through that part of the process until they are pregnant and looking for birth support. So I like to hear about those kinds of stories from people when I can, and also to know other providers who are, on that end of things.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as supporting folks in like sort of pregnancy and birth, there's some resources around for sure. I know Rachel Hess, who's a postpartum doula in JP, she does like First Connections parenting groups, but also LGBT specific parenting groups.
Yeah.
And there was a group at the Armory in Somerville. I don't know if they're still doing it. That was like a non-gestational parent support group.
Wow, that's cool.
And I often work with families. I had a few in a row where, one partner really wanted to carry the pregnancy, but had, fertility issues or health problems come up. And so her partner was the person who carried the pregnancy.
So amazing.
And so, which is an amazing option for certain family constellations for sure. But just supporting that other parent, the non-gestational parent, and saying, this is very much a process for you too. You're important here, and we, understand your experiences with infertility or loss and want you to be as involved as possible and feel like this is as much your baby,
Yep.
I think as far as my experiences supporting folks in hospitals around Boston, they've all been pretty great. Like, nurses don't look at you funny. They see a lot of different kinds of families come in.
I know. I always say, I know I probably already said it today in this interview, but we're so blessed in Boston. We're just so, so blessed in Boston to have the awareness, the education, the support, the openness. I just think we're very, very lucky. There's still work to be done, and that's why we're talking about it today. But here you and I are supporting that population, and in that population ourselves personally. And I'm glad to be doing it.
Definitely, yeah. So you're right. I can't speak to any other place besides Boston. I'm sure it's really different in other locations. I mean, I know some other queer midwives or birth workers in other parts of the country, so I'm happy to point them out on the resources page somewhere if people are looking elsewhere. But mostly what I hear from folks is maybe feeling a little bit more left out in childbirth education classes. So for childbirth educators, that's something to keep in mind. It's not that hard to say partner instead of husband.
Yeah.
Even if it's a class that looks largely heterosexual and everyone's partnered. I mean, some people might not be married. Some people...
Exactly.
There's plenty of single moms. There's plenty of, unmarried parents, there's plenty of everybody else. So that, and I've had classes or heard stories of clients where, maybe the classes were like divided into like moms and dads, and then they're like not sure where to go or what to do, and it's awkward. I had one good friend even tell me a story of her. They took a birthing from within class, and this was in California. I can't point to any particular teacher. I don't know this person personally, but when they separated into like partners and birth people, the instructor with the partners said, she was kind of like, well, this is usually where I talk about having sex after the baby, and then she felt kind of awkward and didn't have that conversation because of the presence of like one female person, and so it kind of like deprived everybody of that conversation, and it was a little, not gracefully handled. So that's often where I see people kind of feel a little left out and a little awkward. Yeah. But often in the birth experience in the hospital, I mean, everyone's that I've been with has been really compassionate and, open and fine.
Yeah, it's so amazing. Yeah. I'm so glad. Yeah. And I know you have an experience in, like, basically all the hospitals in the area. It's so great that
sure. Some more than others, but I'm often at Brigham or Cambridge Birth Center, Cambridge Hospital, Mount Auburn. Yeah. Those are kind of the most often places, but pretty much every other Boston area hospital I've been to.
Yeah. Yeah. This is totally off topic, but I was reading your blog yesterday in preparation for this, and I was reading that the cesarean rates at the different hospitals in Boston are often very different. Yeah. And sure. I really didn't realize that. I kind of thought that basically Boston was Boston, and that a lot of the hospitals, I'm learning more and more that this is not true, but that a lot of the hospitals kind of had the same practices. But what that article pointed out, or your blog post pointed out, in addition to some other conversations that I've had recently, is that sometimes the individual hospitals are like their own little like microcosm like of their own, and that sometimes their policies when it comes to birth, when it comes to fertility, are quite different from hospital to hospital. So it was interesting, and I'm glad I read that blog to see like how different the rates can be and the tendencies can be at the different hospitals.
For sure. And even within a hospital, from practice to practice, really? You sort of pick a provider, but, who else is on their team, who else will be on call that day, but certainly, like, larger than that, the norms of the particular hospitals. I mean, a lot of them are trying to do more delayed cord clamping and be patient and support your unmedicated labor if that's what you want and all this stuff, but it's good to look at the numbers. I mean, some hospitals, Cambridge Health Alliance, Cambridge Birth Center, they're like hovering around 15%, which is great. I mean, that's like what the World Health Organization says should be about average in terms of risk to benefit ratio, best outcomes. And other hospitals are still like in the mid-20s. Yeah. I think in general, the average in the U.S. was around 30% for a while, and most Boston hospitals are like a little bit lower than that, but some of them are certainly closer to that than others. Yeah. And especially even for low-risk people, which is worth checking out if you're a low-risk person, and you're having a low-risk pregnancy, to see if, like, how much more medicalized an experience could be depending on the birth site. It's definitely something, as a doula, I always talk to folks about, especially if they're still in the process of deciding where to give birth and where to get prenatal care. So
yes. And sometimes I think, too, even if they've already decided, sometimes people choose a provider really early on in their pregnancy before maybe they've learned how much option and choice they have in the process. And I always like to encourage people to say that, like, if you want to choose a different provider at any time during the process, you can do that. I mean, I have had people find out that their babies were breech very late in the pregnancy and wanted to do certain things in their birth plan that provider wasn't willing to do, and change at 37, 38 weeks, and you can do that. You have the choice to do that. They are a service provider for you. So
definitely. Yeah. And a lot of people really love their one OB or their one midwife. Yeah. But as support people, we know, like, that's probably not going to be the one person who's there supporting you the whole time, and you really need to look at the other providers in that practice and see what their rates are on average, and who else you might get in the process.
Good point.
But absolutely, I'm a big advocate for switching care at any time. If anybody wants to, like, you're the consumer, you know?
Exactly. They are a service provider.
Yeah.
You just have to ask for what you need.
For sure.
Yeah, cool. So there are a couple of other really awesome things that you offer kind of in addition to your doula services that I want to make sure people know about. And one of them is placenta encapsulation. So can you tell us, from a Chinese medicine practitioner, placenta encapsulation actually makes really good sense to me, but I don't know really anything about it, and I don't know why someone might choose to do that, and kind of like what are the indications for it? Is it just kind of good for everybody? What might lead you to make the decision to do that?
Sure, great question. Well, the connection with Chinese medicine is real.
Yeah.
Placenta is, included in some ancient, recipes of medicinal uses, not necessarily for postpartum specifically, but it does that blood building, that we talked about earlier. And
Chinese medicine is completely obsessed with this idea of building blood.
Yeah. And postpartum is exactly, it's the time to do it.
It's absolutely the time to do it.
Yeah, especially if someone knew ahead of time that they were anemic, or if they had kind of a borderline amount of blood loss in the delivery. Placenta encapsulation could be really good for those folks kind of building back up, because, if somebody does hemorrhage, it's more likely that they might have breast milk supply issues in terms of there's additional care needed right after the birth. There could be a little separation if they need a transfusion or something. Yeah. But also because breast milk is essentially like a blood product. You need to have that blood built to produce enough. So otherwise, the placenta, it can be prepared in one of two ways. Some providers do like a raw prep, which literally the placenta is cleaned, thoroughly washed, dehydrated, and ground into a powder and put into capsules. But there's also the traditional Chinese medicine prep, which involves steaming it with warming herbs before the dehydration process.
That's fascinating.
Exactly. And so it's an energetic warming kind of thing, in Chinese medicine. And other folks resonate with this too, even if they're not Chinese or they don't know about traditional medicine systems. They kind of feel like, oh yeah, I feel really hot right now because I'm pregnant and I've got all this extra weight going on. But once you give birth, and once you lose a lot of blood, it's considered a very yin time, very energetically cold. And so steeping the placenta is considered sort of balancing in that way. A traditional Chinese medicine postpartum involves a lot of ginger, a lot of warm broth and soup and cooked foods that are easy to digest. And, and even I just, dropped off a placenta for a Chinese client yesterday, and she was like, oh yeah, a lot of ginger. I'm washing my hair in ginger tea. That's pretty standard.
It's so good.
To build that heat for even long-term health. Yeah.
Chinese medicine takes it very, very serious. The recovery from labor and birth is taken very seriously. It's a huge ordeal for the mother, and they need time to rest and rebuild and replenish. And so, it just makes perfect sense from a TCM perspective. For sure. And so, I can't point to a large human study on the benefits for a large population, but we know that like any organ meat, it's not that cool, I think, to eat liver and kidneys and hearts of animals these days, but back in the day, everyone knew that those are the most nutrient-dense foods, Yep. Really high B vitamins, high-quality protein, a ton of iron, and so basically that's what the placenta is, it's a temporary organ, and all mammals, except for a few exceptions, eat the placenta after birth. So even when they're offered, there's been studies on animals where they're offered the food they normally eat, like a vegetarian mammal, like a cow that eats grass, right after birth, being offered grass or placenta, and they still choose to eat the placenta. So they think it's not just because they're hungry, it's not just to clean up. This is a piece of instinct. Yeah, exactly. Wow. So there's different schools of thought about why people do or do not do this today, but for folks, I think wrapping your mind around taking a capsule is a lot more palatable than just eating a placenta. Though some people do that, absolutely. It's easier if you have a home birth or something because you've got the kitchen right there, but in a hospital, you have to keep it in the fridge and transport it and then process it soon after birth. So
Some of the benefits, just anecdotally, are better milk supply, which, makes sense from just like the nourishment component, shorter bleeding time. Mm-hmm. It can kind of help cramp the uterus back down. I mean, the placenta still contains levels of oxytocin and stuff like that after the birth. Yeah. And some folks just say more energy. They're a little more even keeled. Like, they're not having these amazing lows and these, kind of like crazed feelings. It's a little bit more
like the transition is smoother. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. So that's most often what I hear from folks.
Yeah, well, that's amazing. I'm glad to know that you're doing that and that people are taking advantage of it, and I hope more people know about it.
Yeah, for sure. And I'd say anybody who either knows that they have low iron, even borderline, is probably a good candidate. Anybody who feels like, that kind of makes sense to me, like, go for it. Yeah. Why not? If you don't like it, you can always stop taking the capsules. But if someone's like, ugh, then, like, by all means, don't do it. It's fine.
Yeah. And there's no risk. I mean, are there risks that we should think about?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you want to make sure that any provider is knowledgeable about any universal sanitation techniques. I mean, certainly if anybody has bloodborne pathogens, the hospital will not release a placenta if that's known. Mm-hmm. But anybody providing it has to do the same universal, sanitation processes. So there's that aspect too. So definitely, check in with people about that. I think that's fine. Yeah. And otherwise, anecdotally, I think a couple people on mom blogs online are like, I tried it and I didn't really like it, or I got a little too energized. Mm-hmm. So for some people, they might already be kind of at this even stage and not super depleted. Mm-hmm. And so it's like a little too much for some people. I did have one client who had an oversupply of milk, which for other folks, they think, oh, that's a great problem to have. But no, it still is uncomfortable and, it's a balancing act like anything. So she just chose to take her capsules at a slower pace. Yeah. But to continue to take them and found them useful. So,
cool. Yeah. I love it. And then I don't want to leave this interview without talking about herbs because you and I talked about this briefly before the interview, but we both practice herbs in our practices, but we do it in a very probably different way. So tell me a little bit about the type of herbs that you use, how you practice it, and then what are people using them for? How are you helping women? How are you supporting them with herbs?
Sure. Great question. And I'm glad you want to talk about it. I know a few other herbalists, and most of them do sort of Western herbalism and not, acupuncture and Chinese medicine like you. So I'm mostly studied in Western herbs. Yeah. And I come from like the vitalist tradition of herbalists. So vitalism is sort of the idea that your body would like to heal itself, that it's able to do so if given the right tools, mm-hmm. And that means different things for different people. So, I grew up around Boston. I was born here. I've lived in Massachusetts my whole life, and mostly the plants I use grow around here. Yeah. And I feel like, regionally, there's medicinal herbs all over the world, and for someone who kind of grew up in this climate in 2017 America, I try to have like an updated form of practice. So an example of this is an average American eats maybe 150 pounds of sugar per year. So that's a little known fact. But we can look at traditional, medicinal documents and have recipes of things, but they won't work quite as well if we're eating like a standard amount of modern American sugar, So it's sort of a holistic mix of thinking about foods, as well as herbs, and herbs as foods, and how to make them accessible to people. Like, do you have time to make a cup of tea? Can you take a bath? Or are you all on the go and you really need to do tinctures because they're quicker? Yeah. But often, so I do have this, like, well-rounded background. I did a clinical herb school program. I went to both major herb schools in the Boston area, and I did a clinical program with the Commonwealth Center for Holistic Herbalism in Brookline. So they have they do a clinic, and they sort of train students to do thorough intake, and consider medications and sensitivities and allergies and all kinds of stuff. But since I'm a birth doula, with most of my time, I spend supporting those folks using herbs. So most commonly that's postpartum sitz baths, simple stuff. breastfeeding support eat. You know, if someone's got a borderline milk supply, we can maybe bump it up a tiny bit with some extra nourishing herbs that are supportive of that. And even like in pregnancy, if people have like heartburn or if they're low in iron and they just want kind of extra nourishment, those are all things I focus on these days, but I definitely have kind of a well-rounded background as like a general practice.
Right, doesn't have to be pregnancy related necessarily.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I have some herb clients who are just not pregnant and they're, you know, they've got, I don't know, eczema or something. And then I have plenty of clients who are pregnant and looking for what herbs are safe during breastfeeding and questions like that.
That's awesome. Yeah. I do a lot of that work too, but like you said, like it's different. It's a different, we're using different herbs, I think.
Sure, yeah.
In a lot of ways, but similar stuff, and I think it's so fun and so useful for people.
Definitely. And it's good to be well-rounded and at least have practitioners that are knowledgeable about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because a lot of folks think, oh, I'll ask my hospital midwife about herbs in pregnancy, and the hospital midwife's going to say, I'm a nurse midwife. We don't talk about herbs in a hospital setting.
Totally.
There's no scientific data on exactly the right constituents to use, and so you really need to search a little deeper to find a practitioner who's like, yes, I do this with all of my time, and I know that it is safe in these circumstances.
I have training. I know what I'm doing.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think the cross-education is kind of, I mean, certainly with the home birth midwife world, there's a lot more herbalism in use, but a lot of folks, at least in Boston and around the U.S., don't plan to have home births, and so they're not going to get that information from their general care providers.
Certainly not. Yeah. Same goes with fertility. You know, I do a lot of fertility work, and herbs can just be a huge, huge resource. It was so beneficial for people who are trying to conceive for a million different reasons, and it's hard. It's hard to get sometimes the Western medicine physicians on board with it.
Sure.
And so it's really up to, you know, women kind of taking charge of their own health and really looking into it and researching it and finding providers who know what they're doing and have proper training and feel really comfortable treating people during pregnancy and before. But for those people who take advantage of it, it's going to be really amazing.
Sure.
Yeah. Love it. So I feel like we're taking a long time, but I do want to ask you one final question before we go, and that is just, I know that you advocacy is a big part of, I don't know, kind of your practice and who you are. So can you tell us a little bit about what role that plays in your life and what you're up to these days?
Sure. Well, I mean, all doulas are advocates, even if it's just in a hospital birth setting, knowing, like, it is, to have a little person there reminding you, like, you can consent to this or not. If you want to have 5 minutes to decide, I think we have 5 minutes right now.
Right.
Like, I can help you come up with questions to ask your provider while they step out for a minute.
Yeah.
And so that's just built in, you know, or even helping somebody advocate for themselves if postpartum they kind of need some resources, but they don't want to get out of the house, and just saying, you know, they're out there. Here's everybody. Here's even like a text line to call, you know, text someone about breastfeeding support. They have those. But aside from that, I mean, I spend a lot of time working with the Boston Doula Project and just kind of destigmatizing abortion, I think, and pregnancy loss. I mean, plenty of our clients through the Doula Project are having an abortion as a result of a pregnancy loss.
Yeah.
You know, so many people need to have DNCs or something after experiencing a miscarriage or an incomplete miscarriage, or they found out that they had a significant health problem or something like that.
Yeah.
So I'm all for, you know, destigmatizing that. Like, certainly any reason that somebody needs to make that decision, it's on them. I don't know everybody's personal details, and it's not my place to judge, just like any doula for any client. But I do think that a lot of my focus is sort of bringing those worlds together and saying they're not opposites. You know, a lot of people experience all of these things, and it's not bad, and we need to keep those things safe and accessible and known to people.
Yeah.
Because it's not the same all over the country. I mean, in Boston, sure, we have a lot of providers, hospitals, even primary care providers, where somebody could get abortion care if they needed it, and certainly contacting the Boston Doula Project, I mean, we help people with getting rides to appointments and things because they can't tell their families, and, you know, all kinds of situations. So I know that that's not the story in other parts of the country. Some people have to drive 6 hours. The one clinic is closing.
Across state lines.
Exactly, right. People picketing at the doors.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that really answers your advocacy.
That totally answers my question. I know we've been talking about it a little bit, like sprinkled through since we first started talking, but I don't know. I think it's important for people to understand that they can reach out for that kind of support and what being an advocate means. So I'm glad that you have explained that, and I'm so thankful that you're doing that kind of work and that we're able to talk about it today and let people know that it's available to them. So I'll definitely put the Boston Doula Project along with all of your contact information in the notes for the video for this interview so that people know how to get in touch with them.
Sure.
But thank you so much for talking to me today. I feel like we covered a lot of ground, but also like talked about things that people don't necessarily know about that are also amazing resources for them. So I'm so glad to have had you on today, and thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It was really nice.
I'm glad. I'll talk to you soon.
Of course. Take care.